If I ask you, like, right now, you can tell me your worst pitch you ever heard out of the 5,000. Could you say it?
Well, there was this one thing that was trying to rent you my driveway. So, like, driveway space is...
I'm not rejecting it yet. Right. Parking's at a premium.
Parking's at a premium, but in suburbs is parking at a premium? So, like, in the city, you don't have a driveway.
Right, so it's got to apply to
So it literally applies to, like a 5-foot radius around a football stadium on 8 days a year.
What about those, we wouldn't talk about suburban homes, but those homes that are right up against industrial parks or against, I don't know, downtown urban centers, before you get to true suburbia, just the residential neighborhoods around there.
But aren't they doing okay on themselves by themselves with a sign that says $20 to park here? And then you
for
don't
the football
need to
games, yes.
Right,
but
but
I
then
wonder
you
about for the daily parking if you're in a place.
It still
where,
works, right?
What's that?
Put up a sign, and then you don't have to give an internet company a cut of like your sign.
So that's the worst. You heard some good
I
pitches.
hate that. I hate that.
You hated that one.
Yeah, I did not like
That's
that.
the sharing economy gone overboard to you?
Well, and I might have been early, so I probably should have looked at it harder. But no, there's a bad pitch that finds you every day. The bad pitches,
I wanted some American Idol type, like.
Well, the bad pitches are we're going to do Facebook better than Facebook because Facebook sucks, right? Those are the ones that like just don't resonate because they're like Facebook sucks, so we're going to build Facebook plus one extra button. And there's just this like oblivious notion that like you can rebuild Facebook just by replicating it, and therefore you'll succeed.
Well, didn't Facebook do that to MySpace? I read once, by the way,
right.
I think it was Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, one of the big guys behind that fund, said, we never, ever invest in pioneers. I want nothing to do with pioneers. Pioneers get scalped. MySpace got scalped. I want the second, the third guy to market.
Well, I saw this tweet today. Google was the 17th search engine to launch. 17th. Right? And there was article after article that said the search market's too crowded. Nobody should be entering this. The 17th one was Google. Right? And now Google's going to build airports in cities and save the world.
Right.
And blimps that connect the whole world.
So maybe the guy that wants to reinvent Facebook.
17th, right, number 17.
Listen, so when you do these interviews, when I do these interviews, you always kind of ask yourself, all right, what do I want to talk to David Tisch about? And I make my list of things, and I think, then you have to ask yourself, what order am I going to address these things in? I don't want to piss him off. I don't want to. I don't want to set a bad antagonistic tone for the next hour. I sure as hell don't want him to walk off.
We could just start there and just go for the hard
no,
stuff.
No, but I can't. In the end, I thought about David. I can't make any adjustments for those potentialities. I have to ask the questions in the order that I think curiosity demands them.
Let's do it.
And here's the deal. Besides your stunning good looks, right? Before you walk into any room, you are pre-introduced. You have something that follows you, not follows you, walks into the room before you, right?
Yep.
And it's your last name.
Yep.
It's the name Tisch. Do you think your last name has been more of a burden or a boost to your career?
I mean, it's insane to call it a burden, right? It's a mistake to sit here and say that you had this amazing opportunity in life that you just walked into, and that's now a negative every time you walk into a room. That said, you have to be aware that people are judging you, and that people have assumptions when you walk into a room that they're gonna look at you with, and until you can either move them away immediately, they're always gonna be sitting there waiting. And so it has to be a benefit. It opens doors. It gives me some semblance of credibility on one hand, but also a semblance of like negative judgment on another hand.
What's the negative judgment?
Here's a rich kid who was born on third base. It gets every opportunity just by walking into a room. And I think that's it definitely in some situations happens to be the truth, but it doesn't mean that door, you can walk in that door just because of that name.
3 years ago, you got the job to essentially run Techstars New York City.
5 years ago.
5 years ago, I'm sorry.
I think.
When you got that job, there was immediate criticism, immediate pushback. A guy named Matt Morellis, I know you know this, who is a founder, an entrepreneur of some sort, said, what is Techstars doing hiring a non-entrepreneur to run its program? Yep. Some anonymous entrepreneur who gave, I think, a quote to Beta Beat said, I have no idea what experience beyond his family history led him to this position. Was that an example right there of the negative prejudgment of you? Or David, you said sometimes it's true. I was born on third base. Or was it accurate?
Matt picked a weird time to do that. So it was about a week after our first demo day. So I had already executed on what I think was one of the better executions of an accelerator that had ever happened. Other than Y Combinator, when I joined Techstars, we did a great job that first program. And so Matt came out a week after that and questioned it. So had Matt said that 3-4 months earlier, I think it was a stronger statement. I think the timing of that statement was a bit off because I had already done the work to show that I was capable of leading a good program.
Doesn't that suggest that perhaps, and this is why we're talking about this, they weren't questioning your experience. They were questioning your last name.
Sure.
How you got it. Was it a velvet rope sort of situation that got you into that job?
It wasn't.
But was that what they were questioning?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that they were questioning how I, given my background, was able to mentor a group of startups to try to succeed. They didn't see anything on my LinkedIn resume that said this person's going to be able to do a great job here.
It's always been weird to me that people use inherited wealth as somehow a discounting factor in your ability or what you're doing. It's, to me, the logical equivalent of holding someone's poverty against them. You really had no say in what you were given. Now, granted, it was a benefit, but it is something that happened to you, right? And so the better question is not whether or not you have the wealth or don't have the wealth, but what you do with the wealth.
I totally agree, right? So you have, it's my life. It's not my grandfather's life, it's not my father's life, it's not anyone else in my family's life. So I can walk in and say, okay, great, I have this, I'm done. Or you can say, I want to do things for myself. I want to build something that's my own. I want to have my own name that is separate from this last name. So who's David Tisch, not who's Tisch. And I think that that's been important for me from the start. And so I think everybody who has a good thing or a bad thing when they're born has to figure out what to do with it.
I find that fascinating. Before we talk about some of the things you chose to do, you essentially answered the question that many people play a game with at the bar, right? Like, if you won the lottery, if you had $50 million, what would you do with your life? And all of us who aren't in that situation wonder, would I be on a beach? Would I do these things? You clearly, I mean, do you feel like your life is an answer to that question? You didn't have to do anything. This is what you chose to do?
Oh, man. Sure. I think that there's, like, from my early childhood, there was no ability not to do something. There was no ability to just take it easy, right? Whether it was in school, whether it was in sports, whether it was in life, I was always pushed to be great and to try harder and to not take the easy path. And so probably from my early childhood upbringing, it just wasn't an option. So
just based on family culture, you're talking about how you're raised?
Yeah, just based on culture. I think that my parents, my grandparents, there was examples of success around me, and so it raised the pressure to be successful. It didn't open up an opportunity to be lazy. And I think there was nobody, when you looked around my family, that was coasting. And I think that as a kid, it put even more pressure to figure out what to do.
Here's something I think is fascinating about your family. We're continuing to talk about this right now, but look, the Tisch family, you guys own 50% of the New York Giants, started the Lowe's Corporation, built it into a multi-billion-dollar industry. I think the family's worth north of $20 billion. But it's not just you looking to blaze his own trail, not follow the family into the Lowe's Corporation. Your dad did the same. And as I read about your family, the truth is your grandfather and his brother, the ones that essentially built this massive wealth, they did the same thing themselves because your great-grandfather had a garment industry. And I would imagine it would have been very easy for them to just follow in the footsteps before buying that first hotel.
And a summer camp in the Catskills, and they could have went into the camping business or into the Catskills and that whole industry. That would have been a mistake, looking back, right, where the Catskills have moved to. But I look at my grandfather as a true entrepreneur. He had a lower middle class family in Brooklyn, figured out how to borrow money to buy a hotel and built that from the ground up. It was a hotel in bankruptcy. It was a hotel that was struggling. And from that single hotel came this Fortune 100 business.
Generation after generation, though, blazing its own trail. Did you feel pressure to do that, David? Actually, did you feel the opposite pressure, not to go into the family business, but to go find your own path?
I think I've always been like that. I think my father is probably the example that I looked at. He never worked for the family business at all. He never spent a day working at Lowe's. He was always interested in creating something of his own. We moved to Westchester outside of the city when I was 3 years old, mainly to get away from a name.
The Tisch name on everything?
Yeah, I think so. I think the goal was that we wanted an independent life, and we wanted to figure out how to build something as a nuclear family. I'm one of 3 brothers, and we lived in the suburbs until I went to law school at age 22. I'd never slept a night in the city. And so when I went to college, I was looped into, oh, you're from the city, you're one of these city kids, and I never felt that burden of living in New York City or the benefit of living in New York City before that. And so it was my father. Looking at him, he built his own business. He ran the high-risk ARB desk at Salomon Brothers. That was him working his way up at Salomon Brothers, not because he had a last name. And I think that's always been something that I was inspired by. So
your trail that you're blazing on your own here is in the tech industry. It's in angel investing. How many companies at this point have you invested in?
About 170.
Do you know what your success ratio is?
I have no idea. I don't find that out for about 5 to 10 years, which makes the whole thing anxiety-ridden, right?
So you don't know if you're good at it or not?
I have no idea. And I think anybody who tells you that they're good at it is judging it on some uncontrollable mechanism that is just egregious to conclude that on. And so when I invest in a company, for me to ever take credit for the success of that company or the credit for that decision is ludicrous. The day you invest as an angel investor, there's 5 to 10 years of stuff that has to play out. So you make this one binary decision up front, and then there's a million things that happen afterwards that you as an investor have no control over. And so it's easy to look back and say, yeah, I knew that was gonna work. Or, yeah, I saw that from the day that person walked into my office. It was an obvious yes.
Well, we know the story of one that is a yes, that is a success, okay? So and it is GroupMe.
Sure.
You were an early investor in GroupMe, which sold to Skype for how much?
About $80 million.
Sold to Skype for $80 million. How
much?
About
18 months in.
18 months later?
Yep.
18 months after your initial investment?
18 months after they started the company.
So they sell for $80 million. What was your initial investment in
$50,000.
$50,000. And what was your return?
About $650,000.
Clear success. Let's rewind. You said you can never go to that initial moment and say, I saw this coming. This was a clear win. I've read about this. You remember the day that you were watching a World Cup game and met with the 2 founders of GroupMe. Tell me that story.
So it was even weirder than that. I'd made one investment before GroupMe, and I went to an event where I was pitching my own startup. And the event was Find a Tech Co-Founder, because I couldn't find an engineer that wanted to work on a sports startup. There was minimal overlap between deep engineering experience and a desire to help the sports industry. And so I stood on a stage in front of about 70 people and pitched my idea. And the other group that was going after me was Birchbox, which has done fantastic afterwards. And neither one of us found a tech co-founder at that event, but a guy I knew looked at me and said, you do investing too. And I'm like, oh, so you really liked my startup. Thanks for the
You like my money.
He's like, yeah. And he goes, you should meet these guys. And he literally tapped these 2 guys, and they turned around. And one was a tall, fat, hippie-looking guy, and the other was this really young-looking, driven, he looked intense. And they were just this sort of mismatch of personalities and looks next to each other. And they started talking about a hack that they had made a week earlier. And I had actually watched at TechCrunch at the hackathon them present, so I sort of had some familiarity with it. We talked for 5 minutes and decided to go out the next morning to grab breakfast. And I guess later that night we realized that the World Cup game was on during that time, so we found a bar that we could watch the game at and eat some breakfast. And so during our meeting, it was this back and forth between talking about GroupMe and sort of the potential investment and cheering on the U.S. That was a game that Landon Donovan scored that crazy overtime goal, and it was the height of, I guess, 2010 U.S. soccer.
You remember Landon Donovan's goal, but I know you've written, you don't remember the actual contents of the conversation that morning, them pitching you on the business, but what you said is you remember the feel, the energy of the conversation.
Yeah, I think that, and as I look back, that was it ended up being my 3rd investment. I made one in the middle there. 170 later, I think that's what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody that you connect with, that you believe in. And it doesn't need to be somebody you want to be friends with. I think that's the biggest mistake that a lot of investors make, is they're looking for somebody they want to hang out with. If you look at the most successful people at building companies, they're not people you necessarily want to go to the bar with or have at your house for dinner, right? There's some intensity, awkwardness, just sort of different personality that isn't always like, oh, that's my next best friend, but instead you're looking for just something different. And so with those guys, it was a passion. It was a passion for what they were doing. It was a confidence. It was a little bit of a swagger, but they really were able to articulate not just this cute little thing that they had done, but where this was going. And I think that that's the, you never fund somebody for what they've done. You're funding them for where they're going to go with it.
Have you had a great failure yet?
Have I personally? Yeah, a lot. I'm terrible at holding down a job. So every time I've ever been hired, I've walked out of that pretty uncomfortably at the end.
Why? Why can't you hold a job?
Probably bad at listening. I overspeak my mind sometimes, and I don't really, I don't thrive in the status quo. I'm not looking to just incrementally increase something or play a game. And I think that...
Is it distraction? You need the next stimulation? Is it sort of like the investor's form of ADHD?
No, I think it's more just I'm not comfortable settling. I don't really want to be okay with mediocrity. And so I want to be the best, and I want to push to be the best. And so when I've been in a job situation, I've wanted the company to go faster and push harder and break more rules. And I think that when you get into a bigger company, that's very hard to do.
Have you had a failure as an investor? You know, listen, I was reading.
Sure.
When you took over Techstars, there was 5 criteria that David Cohen said he wanted to see in the guy. He eventually chose to run Techstars.
Yep.
Which ended up being you.
Yep.
But I remember clearly the first 2, which were he needed to have a major success and he needed to have a major failure.
Yep.
Do you have that failure in the investing, in the operator, in the founder world?
Yeah. I mean, my second pitch I ever heard was Zynga. So I spoke to Mark Pincus on the phone. Mark had grown up with a random family friend that I'd been friends with for 30 years, and or 27 years at that point. And he put me on the phone. I was playing professional poker at the time. And so Mark Pincus's first concept at Zynga was poker on Facebook. And at the time, poker was thriving. It was the period when there were poker ads on TV for Party Poker and Poker Stars, which is where I was playing. And so I got on the phone with Mark Pincus, and I had not really understood how successful he was at Tribe and sort of how credible he was. And he pitched me the concept of Facebook poker, and I didn't get it. I just said, I don't understand why anybody would use Facebook to play games, let alone poker, which is working over here so well. And over the next year, the government shut down the pay-for-play pokers. They eliminated the ability to put money into these sites, and casual gaming as a category just emerged because of Zynga. And so I basically hung up the phone with Mark thinking that's a really dumb idea. And so my second startup I had ever heard was Zynga. And for the next 4 years, I watched this company just have a meteoric rise. And I sat there and I'm like, probably should have listened to that a little more closely.
So you would suggest your biggest failure is a pass in that situation?
I think as an investor, there's only a single decision that you make. Again, right, I don't believe investors make or break companies. I think investors make one decision, and it happens basically at the very beginning of a relationship, and it's a binary decision. Am I investing or am I not investing?
What about a company that you put money into that you thought clearly had upside that turned out not to?
Sure,
wrong operator, wrong idea.
Yeah, but if you look at the numbers, I'm supposed to fail 70% of the time. And so if you look at any one of those failures and say, I screwed up here, and you take that to heart, as opposed to, I screwed up here, what can I learn from this to make the next one? I think that's a mistake. And so NFL cornerbacks, the defenders, right? They're trained that if you let up an 80-yard touchdown, the next thing you do is think about the next play.
Right.
You don't spend any time reflecting. I take the same view as an angel investor. If we screw up, we screwed up, next play. And so instead of trying to spend time figuring out how to fix this situation and how to sort of punish an entrepreneur, which I have no interest in doing, I think, okay, what's next?
Failure is a concept that I'm absolutely, I'm just obsessed with. I probably value failure too much. I've started 2 companies. One is success, one is a failure. And I have other entrepreneurial friends who have also had failures in their startups. And everyone that has talks about it being the most valuable thing that ever happened to them in their life. And I'm curious, you had David Cohen say to you, I want someone who's had one great success and one great failure. What I've always wondered from the investor side is everyone talks a good game about valuing failure, but do they really? If I, as an operator, come in and sit down with you and say, I've had this success, I've had this failure, is the existence of the failure, is it really a net plus for you? Or do you want somebody to come in who's bulletproof, or at least pretending to be?
Great question. I totally agree that the failure thing is overrated, and everybody says like, oh, we're looking for failures, right? If you come in and you failed 4 times, there's not like, oh, you've run out of failures, now the next one's gonna win. I think that if you can articulate what you've extracted from a fail and how great you were at failing, meaning how you actually really tried hard, and this was not necessarily like a screw up, but was a genuine fail, I think, yes, then there's some value in it. I think in today's sort of startup world, it's glorified. And it's glorified in the sense of, hey, I raised money, up, I'm done, I'm ready to go again. That's nonsense to me, right? And so if there's a lack of respect for the effort that you had put in the last time, it's sort of a big turnoff.
I'll tell you, it was about 5 years ago where my family was really starting to come under attack. We were in New York, and I mean, it was crazy. It was a crazy time. And we had some friends come over to our house, and they said, have you ever heard of Front Sight? I'd never heard of Front Sight, but they explained it to me. And then we started doing our homework. This is a world famous Front Sight Firearms Training Institute. This is where you go and you train to be like a Navy SEAL. We have just formed a partnership with Dr. Piazza. He's the guy, the main guy who has helped, I think, 1 million people train now, to give you an exclusive Blaze Legacy lifetime membership at Front Sight. It provides a lifetime of training valued at over $9,900 for $300. That's it. Tanya and I, the family, we are lifetime members of Front Sight. Join me, see the amazing bonuses that we've arranged. If you respond right now, go to tryfrontsight.com. Tryfrontsight.com.
You chose to go down this path towards tech and startups. As you said, you've had multiple generations of your family that have essentially been entrepreneurs. What is it about entrepreneurs that I would assume in some way you seem to revere?
You have one shot, right? We all have one life, and we can do something to either work for someone else and make a name within somebody else's world, or you can create your own. And the ability to just do something on your own, it's the most powerful opportunity there is to me, right? And it's not about fame, it's not about glory, it's about the ability to come out and just like put your taste on the world. And I think that that's, it's just more interesting to me than doing it on behalf of somebody else. And so unless that person that you're doing it for is the most inspiring person you've ever met. And I think that that's where a lot of people settle, is they're not looking for inspiration from their boss. And I think that those are the situations as an employee that I would look around and say, I can do better than this. I can find somebody I want to work with that inspires me more than the person I'm working with today.
How much does risk have to do with it?
I'm a neurotic homebody, so I don't think I'm sitting around looking for risk or adrenaline rushes.
You're playing poker on the internet.
Yeah, but I was bored in law school. It was not at a risk that I think I was fiending. The risk stuff doesn't excite me as much as I think the creation stuff excites me. So I want to build something that's mine. I think that's much more interesting than taking a risk and sort of saying like, I'm going for it right now. Not my driver.
I saw you once say we need to do a better job. We, the media, entrepreneurs, investors, of painting pictures around entrepreneurs, telling the story of entrepreneurs. In fact, I think you said the Facebook movie was one of the best examples of painting a picture around an entrepreneur that you would hope to see inspire future entrepreneurs. How do we do this? I mean, how do we paint better pictures of entrepreneurs?
I think we're moving in a way that's very hard to do that, right? We're going to 140 characters. We're going to 6-second videos. We're going to hit or miss headlines. When you start doing that, the stories just evaporate overnight, right? You're not telling an in-depth lesson. You're literally looking for the one-liner that the world can capture and run with. And so you see these stories that get summed up into a sentence, into a single article. Those are doing no injustice. I think the the story, watching a startup from the very beginning to the point where they feel confident that what they're doing is working, those stories are incredibly hard to articulate in any form.
Will they take place over a year or two's time
Right,
period?
and there's nothing exciting about like watching somebody go down for 7 months straight without like an event in the middle, right? It's just this like slide downward and then a slight curve up and then down. And you hear they're roller coasters, but on roller coasters you have steep ups and steep downs. In entrepreneur world, those steep ups might take 3 weeks or 3 months, and that's not extractable for a news article or for a tweet or for a Vine video.
Well, in very, very few times do they lend themselves to drama, some interaction between
Correct.
you and me. The drama is occurring internally.
Right.
What risk have I taken? What have I put my family into?
And
what
what
does
have
my future
what
look
have I
like?
put my employees into, right?
Right.
I think that's the hardest story to tell is the internal culture story. The only internal culture stories that get told are the fights, right? The negative stuff. We kicked this founder out, or these two people didn't like each other and so this person left early, right? Those are the only dramatic stories that get told in a startup. The real story is, how do you convince an engineer to change jobs? How do you convince a 45-year-old with 3 kids to believe in this 22-year-old story and join them on their journey?
How do you get your financing window in the time you need to actually launch?
Right. All these, and you know, I was with an entrepreneur this morning in our portfolio, and he's looking and says, my drop dead date is March of next year. How do I grow before that? I'm like, Ben, I think you have more time. I think you'll be able to raise around, but he has no confidence that that's the factor. So he's 7 months from now, and there's a date in his head that he's just like, we will die on that day. And you can't tell that. That's not a movie. There's nothing exciting about that.
Well, it's dramatic to Ben, though.
Oh, it changes your life, right? And it affects everything you're ever going to do. It affects your personal relationships. It affects your family. It affects your happiness internally. And those things just aren't made for a movie.
Let's talk about hype. You've seen, I asked you earlier how many pitches you've seen. You said you've seen over 5,000 pitches, you think. You've pitched yourself several times. And you're up to this point, you have been involved in the angel investing side of tech. That means seed level, very first guy through the door giving money to something. And you're essentially giving money to a dream.
Yep.
Nothing but a vision.
No data.
No data.
No real data. Any of the
Not a
data
business.
Not a business, sometimes not a product. Sometimes it's just people with an idea. So it's hard. There's no science. I think the biggest lesson I've taken away from investing in the past, I've done it for 5 years, full time now,
This is pure art. And like art on a wall at a gallery, you have no idea what it should cost.
It's some made-up number.
But Dave, that also opens you up, just like with art, to massive fraud.
Yes.
I mean, people who are pretending,
Yep.
charlatans.
Yep.
What it seems to me is what gets possibly rewarded at the angel stage, more often than not, is the pitch man, not the operator. Because as you said, you have no data to judge. You have an idea, and you have a guy in front of you who's selling you passion. Don't we have to distinguish between what makes for a good pitch and what makes for a good business?
100%. And I think that in certain businesses, it's really hard to de-risk the operating side right away, right? If the plan is to build an independent workforce, a shared economy workforce, and you haven't started that yet, do I have any confidence from hearing your story that you're going to be able to do that? I think it's very hard to say, like, oh, because they said this and this, they're now going to be able to execute on that and that.
You're buying a dream, you're buying a guy.
It's a gut decision, and anybody who says it's science or that they figured out how to tell these things, tell the sort of real from the not real, I think is a stretch. I don't think that anybody has a prescription. So as an angel investor that's done this before, it's a lot easier to detect bull, right? There's a hype factor that I'm discounting every entrepreneur with. When they say something's easy, I immediately assume it's not easy, and where's the difficulty in the assumption that they just jump to? Mm-hmm. I think as a outsider looking at angel investing, it looks really easy. You're like, yes or no? I think for me, what you've developed, and as I started this, and this is why I don't think I have any idea if I'm good at it, it's pattern recognition. And so I'm 5 years in. Every investment that you make, you're believing in a 5 to 10 year vision, right? And so
We'll start learning over the next 5 years if David Tisch is good at this.
I have no idea until the whole cycle plays out. Until I can see one of my companies go for the vision that they actually pitched. So every exit you've had, while they're awesome and for a founder, life-changing, right? Every exit that happens in a year and a half in to a startup, they're life-changing events, period, for the founder.
You know, it seems to me, I told you I've started 2 separate businesses, raised money twice, and I've heard this saying more often than not, that as an investor, we bet on jockeys, not on horses. It's also tied to this concept of buying the pitch, of buying the guy in front of you, his passion. You mentioned the passion of the Group Me guys earlier, the energy. At some point, it appears what you are as an angel investor is more a psychologist than a businessman. You're looking into the eyes of somebody who could be full of who could be a hype man, a charlatan, or actually a visionary.
I think that's 100% correct. And I think that doesn't get talked about, right? There's this notion of we're looking at data, we're looking for traction, we're looking to mathematically figure out the market size, right? Like nobody does that work. You can't find an angel investor on the planet that is doing the real diligence on a market to genuinely understand the actual size. What you're finding is people who have seen enough of this market understand it's sort of binary. It's either really big or it's not big enough. And I think that the notion that we're coming at this and saying, I figured out the answer is not true. I look for leadership skills, right? That's a amorphous thing because leaders look like anything. Leaders come in all shapes and sizes. And the way that somebody leads isn't the same as the way somebody else leads. If you see it in sports, you see the vocal lead by example, sort of fire people up. Ray Lewis is the example, right? Or Michael Strahan when he came out of the tunnel and he fired the energy up. On the flip side, you see quiet leaders that just sort of sit back and lead by example. You can find the same examples in entrepreneurship. You find leaders that are at the forefront, that are speaking at every conference, telling everybody about their company, and then you see the leaders that are in the office every day building the culture, building the cult inside of that company. That's what you're looking for as an angel investor, somebody that can drive a mission to other people.
How often have you been presented with what you think is a good idea and a good operator behind the scenes, but told him, I think you need to go find a leader for this company?
Frequently, and these days more frequently.
Really? So essentially what you're seeing is engineers who have a great idea?
No, because I think it's the opposite. I think you can find business people who think that they can build a team of engineers but have no ability to lead a group of engineers. So I actually think the engineering leader is a lot more backable than the business leader. And so it's not really a pitch man, it's somebody that understands how to lead a culture. And if you've never managed a group of engineers, if you've never had a product team under your belt before and understood how to get the best out of a designer, the best out of a product manager, the best out of an engineer, the best out of a data scientist, I don't know how you're going to figure that out on the fly.
It's hard for me to escape how much hype is a part of this business, though. I actually saw you say this as well. It's better to raise your money right before you go live, not after you've gone live, and somebody can actually analyze your traction.
Numbers ruin the story, right? They do, but in a good and bad way, right? Because if I'm judging any business on
sell the dream as long as you can?
100%. You have to sell the dream because nobody's funding you for what you've done. Never, ever, ever does somebody write a check because you did something last week. They're only writing a check to fuel, like money is fuel in startup world, right? Most companies are burning money, they're not making money. If you're making money, you raise money to burn more money. And so it's fuel, and all it is fuel. Fuel needs to get you somewhere. It doesn't reward you for where you've been, right? And so I think the notion of looking at the traction of a 2-month-old startup is a big stretch.
All right, so you yourself now have switched sides of the table. In June, you raised your money, took your own advice. You launched just this past few weeks, Spring, a new app. Raised your money, as I said, 2 months ahead of time. Now we'll see how Spring does. Tell me about Spring.
So my brother and I, my brother's the CEO, I'm the chairman, so I'm still doing full-time investing. I'm spending a lot of time on Spring as well. And so basically a year and a half ago, my younger brother, Alan, came to me and he said, I have an idea. I'm like, no, you don't. Please don't have an idea. And the more we started flushing it out, the more interesting it became. And so we set out to build Spring about 18 months ago. And the concept is, what does a sort of a shopping experience on your phone look like? And so if you think about your phone today, there's an aggregation of experiences, right? If you go to Facebook, that's for networking. You can communicate through Facebook. If you go to a Twitter, that's for consumption of information. There's a feed of information. If you think about buying things on your phone and how disparate that experience is, to jump from one app to the other to do things, or to go onto the mobile web, which nobody really does, to buy something, the experience of every transaction was so friction-filled. And everything felt totally different. And so what Spring does is it allows you as a user to click on a button, find your favorite brands, follow your favorite brands, and buy things from them with ease. And so it's a complement to what we think is a lot of the existing social networks out there.
Interestingly, I didn't hear you use the word fashion just now. Now I know, and I don't know if the viewer knows, Spring, at least for now, is about fashion. You follow brands that you like, that pushes clothing items to you. You can swipe in the Tinder style of photos. In fact, I saw TechCrunch describe it as, what is it, Instagram plus Tinder plus Uber. By the way, was that necessary for the pitch? Do you have to have like a Hollywood pitch?
We did not put those words out there. I think for us, the way we describe it is that, why are you ever going to download a single brand's app? There's no reason why I would download other than my favorite brand, right? One, but not five. So if you love Nike, you love a jean company, a shirt company, a watch company, you're not going to download each of their individual apps. And even if you do, why are you going to open them regularly? You're going to open them when you want something from that brand, so there has to be intent already there to go open that app. And where do those apps live on your phone? You have a limited amount of real estate. And so for us, the notion was, if you bring all those apps like a mall does, right, offline, or like Soho or Fifth Avenue does offline, if you bring all of those things together in one area and make it easier for the user to consume them all in a lot sort of easier user experience, that's a big opportunity. Why did we start in fashion? Because fashion lends itself to this experience.
But it's clear you don't intend to stop at fashion.
No, I don't think that's the goal of the company. I think the goal of the company is to be a transactional platform on your phone. So if you want to buy...
Who is the biggest competitor for this?
Who's the biggest?
Amazon?
Probably if we're successful, Amazon. I think it's arrogant for me to sit here and say we're competing with Amazon. We're a month old. We have 250 brands selling, I think today, 9,000 items on Spring. Amazon has probably 900 million items.
Amazon's already been invoked in some of the articles about Spring, if nothing more than for the fact that they've patented one-click buy, so you guys are swipe buying.
We do swipe to buy. It's we just, again, right, the shopping cart, the fill out your information, this whole like clunkiness of e-commerce was something we just thought there was room for improvement on.
What do you think about the time, the frame, where we are now for when you've chosen to launch Spring? I've seen you say there are too many fall. Yeah, fashion's good in the fall. No. I've seen you say there are too many founders out there. There are too many companies out there. Essentially, what I read between the lines I'm hearing you is, we're in this bubble. The bubble is real, and it's certainly, when I hear you, I hear concern.
I don't think what I'm saying is that we're in a financial bubble around the tech startup world, because if you think about what too many founders and too many companies lend towards, it's a dilution of talent, right? That's the issue to me, is there's just a massive dilution of talent.
Well, it also means that there's an extreme ease of getting money.
But such a small amount of money, right? $500,000 to $1 million for a company is not a lot. Yes, if there are thousands of them, that number adds up, but it still doesn't add up to the amount of money that was lost in 1-2 companies in the bubble that we all refer back to, right? In that bubble, there was hundreds of millions of dollars lost in each of the companies that failed. In these companies today that are losing, it's $500,000, it's $750,000. That's not going to macro affect the world, right? But what it does affect is that 2, 4, 6-person team, instead of working on something that doesn't work, that's small, and that's too hard to make a successful big opportunity, that 6-person team could be working on something with other 6-person teams to build something great. you've heard Facebook founders say this all the time.
Facebook would be impossible built today because the collection of the talent that they had there in the first 4 years, no company can match that today.
I think that what you're seeing is on the flip side, companies that break out then are able to recruit incredible talent. And so Uber today is filling their leadership roles and their general manager roles with incredible talent, but it took them, success in order to build that team. I don't think what you're seeing is a collection of 50 world-class people day one at a company. And I think that that's an opportunity that if you can build a team like that, it's a big opportunity.
All right, man. Well, I wish you luck with spring.
Thank you so much for having
Thanks
me.
for doing this, man.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. You can walk out. Hey, you mentioned your brother said, I have an idea. You're like, no, please don't have an idea. Do you have any relationships that haven't turned transactional? Does everybody come to you? David, I've got an idea.
There are a lot of people that have ideas these days.
Is that a reflection of the market or your place in the world?
I think it's a reflection of the world we live in right now. Is there's so many opportunities, right? There's all these older businesses that are just like, look at this room. Where's technology? There? That's the technology in this room, right? Or the refrigerator, or this crazy camera. Right. But there's nothing in this room that's smart. Everywhere we go that there's not technology winning, it will win, right? It just is going to take some time.
Hey, I really am curious in this interview. You can go if you got to go.
No,
one of the places where we're seeing a huge amount of investment and growth is in content. Content's been out of vogue for 5-10 years, right? It's all been on tech, software.
Yep.
Content seems to be back. Everybody wants it. Facebook wants to compete with YouTube now
Totally.
for content. Vice is getting extremely, I don't know, some could say ridiculous valuations. Do you think, what is the future of content? Is it a boom market, or is it bubbling up as well?
No, I mean, look at the existing content players that are leading right now. They're going away really quickly because
their legacy players getting old.
And they're not modernizing. And every effort to modernize is still holding on to too much legacy. And if you think about the modern consumer, and this isn't just saying millennials, right? I'm not obfuscating that word. Every consumer is looking for something a bit more real. And I think you've seen the
authentic?
Yeah, I think you've seen that the corporate world has become more authentic in the past 10 years. I don't think you've seen that in the content world. If you watch TV and you watch TV news, one of my favorite things to do is watch the local news. And if you actually watch the local news and then write down the sentences that they say out loud, there's some of the craziest things you've ever heard.
No, you're exactly right, and that's what Vice has at least mastered the image of, and maybe they really are, right? But it's authenticity. Whereas, and I like 60 Minutes, but 60 Minutes is selling you, I'm an expert every second of this program, right? The guy telling you the story. Vice is selling you, I'm learning this with you, and that's authentic.
And it's covering a subject at depth, right? There's no censorship. There's no true, there's no publicly true angle that they're saying, we want to teach you, this is the way to think about this. They're saying, here, make up your own mind. And I think that what social's done for all of us is given us exposure to different opinions. And I think that that's what media for the past, or content for the past 10 years has done a bad job of diversifying the opinions within that one content source. And so I think that the ability for consumers to see the other opinions has forced content owners and creators to think a little bit more diverse. So I would say that every single old content company that still holds a big place in sort of the mindset of America is in trouble unless they modernize.
They know that. That's why the valuations are where they are. They're the one driving the valuations.
I think content's super interesting, and Andreessen Horowitz is showing that that's a space that they believe in too.